this is going to be True Crime Live. I'm just getting set up here. Okay, how is everybody doing today? Sorry it's so dark in here. The weather outside is not great. How is everybody today? Okay, so have a lot to cover, not only in this live as far as the case goes, but also wanted to update you guys about how things are going because not going great. I don't want the hair sticking out like that. It's kind of whatever. Sorry, my phone's going off. Okay. Get my messy self together here. All right. So I have gone live here while also going live over on the other app that has 2 T's in it. I put out a post about everything that had happened, not everything that happened, but kind of saying, like, if you guys are looking for me over there, you can't find me. But I didn't really elaborate on what is going on. So I wanted to come on to talk about that. And I was right in the middle of the West Memphis 3 case, so I kind of wanted to wrap that up as much as I can. I mean, I can't really wrap it up when, like, I was right in the middle of a whole case about it. But what do you do? So here we are. So over on that other app, I have been banned. I don't know why. They are supposed to give me a reason, heads up of some sort. They did not. They basically just did it. I woke up one morning and it was gone, completely gone. I can't get into the account at all. It said that there's a 7-day waiting period to hear what's going to happen. And I have not received any one way or the other, any sort of announcement, reason, anything. This was disappointing for a lot of reasons. One being that I got no warning. I think that's the biggest problem I had with all of it was there was no reasoning, no warning. It was just gone. And I am a creator over there who would be, having some sort of income from that. I wasn't getting much anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But when you're just no warning, no nothing, I had no time to prepare. I was right in the middle of a big deep dive. I could not tell people to come over here. There was just no warning, no nothing, just gone. I don't know what the reasoning is. I said that in my appeal. I was like, I don't know what I did wrong. This community overall is a very hard place to be as far as storytelling because you have to kind of skirt around what you want to say. So it could have been that. Could have been that I, said something that was against what they wanted to say, and it's a lot harsher over there. I'm just disappointed that I worked so hard to build that account up, to create friendships over. I can't contact anybody. Everything's just gone. Yeah, it was really hard. So I'm moving on. I am waiting to hear back. If I get let back in, I guess I will continue creating content there. If I do not, I'm just going to move over here. I was planning on kind of trying to shift to doing the podcast again and doing content over here anyway. So I may just do that. It's kind of left me in a spot where it's I don't know what to do. I had been checking, I do an account check after every video because I know this is the name of the game. You say something and it's it's, flagged. So I had been checking my account. I had been trying to do everything right, and there was just no warning, no nothing. It was just gone. And when you spend so much time that like true crime creators do with trying to put together this material and trying to do the best that you can, it's really disappointing when it's all just taken away, especially without any communication or reasoning. So that's what's going on over there. Like I said, I'm going to try to shift a little bit more towards this app anyway, this platform. It's where I began. I want to get back into the podcast, doing it weekly, and posting more on here anyway. But it was a big blow because I had built that up for the last year. I mean, I was posting twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day, like big cases that like need attention, cases that, I mean, I had spent hours researching and then it's just gone without reasoning. So there's that. Hello, welcome. Sorry that's happening. Yeah, it stinks. It really stinks. And like I said, like one of the biggest things was like I was right in the middle of a huge case, the West Memphis 3. And to me, like this case is one of the biggest cases of our generation. This case has so much to learn from it, so much to gain from it. And I feel like it can be solved. And to just take that away in the middle of it was devastating for me because I was like, well, what do I do now? I have all of this. I had just filmed the last of the series and it was sitting in my drafts. So I don't know if I'll get that back. I have no idea. But I had kind of wrapped up this series, the deep dive, and now I'm like, it's just was cut off in the middle. So I'm just scrambling on what to do. With that, I had thought about a couple different things, doing just a whole big video of the whole case. I had thought about, doing that, but then I'm like, I'm going to have more to say. Knowing me, I'm going to have so much more to say because that's what's so lovely about doing short-form content is I can give you a video of like a topic within a topic. So I could do, this is why the suspect, I think it is, and give you a whole just short video of that. And I was planning for that kind of content. So my notes are kind of everywhere. I'm just kind of scrambling to try to figure it all out. But I thought I have the time today. I have, an hour or so. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to just ramble on about the case, try to get some information out there. And then that way you guys can come back to this and reference this video if you want more answers than what the short-term content didn't do. It's a whole thing. It is a whole thing, for real. And TikTok just has so many, that other platform has just so many more rules than YouTube does, and that's why I think it's kind of better to do long-form content here anyway. I don't know. I'm so baffled because I just really was getting my footing. Like I started to really make content that I was really proud of and really like putting my all into. I was getting to the point where I was like, okay, I've got my flow on editing, I've got my flow, and it was just boom. Keep recording, I guess, and post them if you can. Yeah, I will. I've got to get the hang of editing over here. I've got to get a hang of like my note taking being different. But I'll get there. Just hang in there. I started on YouTube, so I can definitely switch and go back. I just have to get back into it again. It's so so frustrating. I'm just frustrated at the whole thing. Frustrated. But I did want to come back to this case. And being on a computer is very different for me too, so hang in there with me, guys. I'm trying to get the hang of doing lives, because what I would love to do is just give you guys the cases live so you can talk to me about them, so that, you know, we can bounce ideas off of each other. Also, like, it's not editing, so I could get it out faster. It's just all overall would just be great. I don't know. I'm playing with a couple ideas of what to do, but for now, just hang in there with me while I try to figure it out. But let's talk about the West Memphis 3. So let's start from the beginning, because I did put out a few videos. But this case, it just has so many levels of... It has so many levels of victims. It has so many levels of injustice. But it also has so many levels of intrigue, and where we can learn from things and where we can grow from things. I truly feel like this is a case that is like, just should be shown to everyone. Because for one, I think when you start getting into the injustice that the teenage boys went through, and their false confession and coercion there, the, you know, court system that they went through, like, all of that is, I mean, it's textbook coercion in my mind, and textbook, you know, putting someone in jail who doesn't belong there. And it happened with 3 different boys. And then what's really sad about this case is that part gets so big, and it kind of just took on a life of its own, that it became like this case split into 2. And you have the original case of these 3 young boys that were unalived in this most horrendous and horrific way that is still unsolved, that we still have, you know, work to do on. And then it splits off into the case of injustice against 3 teenage boys who didn't do it. There's evidence that they didn't do it, and they just got railroaded and put in jail, and lost years of their lives. So it's kind of 2 cases into one. And it's very fascinating. It's very interesting. And it's textbook true crime in a lot of ways. And we can learn a lot from this case. So this all started on May 5th, 1993. And you have these 3 young boys, and they are riding their bikes. I mean, the most innocent thing that you can think of for 3 young boys. They're riding their bikes, and this is in West Memphis, Arkansas. It's after school time. They're just hanging out, doing nothing, and they decide to go into a wooded area. And they play here all the time. They're building the sport here. And, like, I can just visualize, I don't know if you guys can, like, are visual people, but I am, and I can visualize these 3 young boys playing in the woods and just, like, building things, and they got their sticks, and they're all Boy Scouts. So they're just like, finding little animals and bugs and just different nature. And this was a different time in the 90s where you came home and the streetlights came on and nobody went looking for you because you're a kid and you'll be fine. And I think that's kind of where all of this started. Was it's a very 90s small town environment. The majority of these kids' parents were working late. They didn't get home, right after school. And these three boys were just meant to hang out with each other, maybe at each other's houses or around, and come back. And they didn't come home. And it was like, where are our sons? And that's where it started, this just craziness of this case. So the community of West Memphis didn't have a ton of crime. Arkansas in itself is those tiny Midwestern towns, much like what I grew up in, which was, everybody knows everybody. Everybody's in everybody's business. Everybody's kids. And it was small and safe. Like, I remember riding my bike after school down to my friend's house, or she would come to mine, and we would play out in backyards, much like these boys were doing that day. And so this case just, from then on, it felt like it just got worse and worse and worser. That's a word, as we go. So this is the West Memphis 3 and the injustice that happened afterwards. It's also important to point out in this case that this town, not only being the 90s, but was very religious in a lot of ways. They had a church on every corner. They were close-knit, knew each other. It was a deep religious rooted community. And that plays a lot into where we go later. So our victims are Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. They are all 8 years old. They all were Boy Scouts, great kids, never had any issues. They were good in school, but just typical 8-year-old kids. And I think what really drew me to this case, and this is a case I said I would never do. I knew about it, I knew of it, but I was like, I don't want to tackle that because it was so hard. It's so emotionally hard to look at. And then I have a daughter who's 9, and you think about their innocence right now. Like, the only thing kids that are this age are worried about is like 6, 7, and like going to school, and that's it. Like, they don't know all the things that adults have and how horrible things are just around the corner. And that's what just, I guess, tore me apart about this case, was putting myself in the shoes of those 8-year-old boys and not knowing what they're coming up against. They had no idea what they were about to experience. So that afternoon, May 5th, like I said, this was after school. The boys were seen riding around, and you have a lot of different eyewitness accounts. And when I was going through this case, I was like, I'm not really going to take the word of anybody here. I kind of just ignored a lot of the eyewitness accounts, and let me tell you why here. Because first of all, you have people who see these boys every day. If you see your neighbor every day, are you going to be able to tell me that last Wednesday they were at a specific place? You can get mixed up between they were here one day and not here the next. That's one thing. Two, I think a lot of these witnesses were younger people. They had just gotten off of school. They were easily impressionable by police officers. And eyewitnesses' accounts are just so notoriously bad in a lot of ways. So I just don't take a lot of that. But these boys were seen in the neighborhood. We basically have the idea that they were riding around. We have two on their bikes, and then one that was like kind of like either walking beside them or like riding on the back, like we all used to do. So they're seen in the neighborhood, and then they're also seen going into this wooded area. The wooded area is, unless you see it on a map, it's very interesting because it's this dense woods right in the middle of not dense woods. Like, it's almost in the middle of a field in a way, and then you have like a car wash and somewhat of a highway, but it's a very dense wooded area. Like, when you see pictures of the crime scene and you see the pictures of the police officers there, it's definitely more treacherous than I was picturing. So they go into the woods. They never come home. You have one of the parents reporting them missing. They went to each of the boys, because they're always together, houses, and they all figured out, okay, none of our boys came home tonight. We have a problem. They called police. Police began searching pretty much right away. They began searching the neighborhood and then expanded outward. And they searched that wooded area, and they found nothing that night. Along with, all the parents were up pretty much all night searching until they couldn't search anymore. And there was no trace of them. Their bikes were gone, and all three boys gone. And it was just so strange. So they were reported missing around 7. The police, everybody searched all night, couldn't find anything. So, and they had spotlights, they had dogs, nothing. So early the next morning, investigators decided they were going to go out and continue the search. And investigators are walking through that wooded area. And I urge you to look up the crime scene pictures, or at least pictures of the area. Because what you have is a dense wooded area, and it's like the two sides of a bank kind of go like this, and there's water. So it's not a big round water, and it's not super high. It's very strange to think about. It's like a little ravine, and the majority of it is mud. It's not even like super water rushing through. It's more like trickling down and just mud. And you see these officers, and they're just trailing through this mud. So you have these officers, they're searching, they're looking, they don't find anything. And this officer goes to this area, and the area where the boys were eventually found has a piping that goes from one side to another. And in recent pictures, that piping is completely covered by water because of just environment. But back in the 90s, you see that piping, and the boys would go back and forth going into the woods. And the piping, the way that it laid, went into the neighborhood. So it was just an easy access for people to come in there and leave, especially the boys when they were playing or whatnot. So the officer's down there by the piping, and he sees something floating. Now, there's different reports. One report said that it was a hat, but mostly reported it says that there is a shoe, a child's shoe, floating in the muck there. And I think the police officer looked at it, and I think he thought, oh no, something is wrong. Because, and this is what I think a detail that a lot of people don't talk about is the police the night before are not looking for unalived children. They are looking for alive, possibly hurt, possibly just didn't want to come home kids. So they're not going into this amount of water looking for them. They're not trudging through that. They're just yelling their names. So people are like, how did they miss them? How did they miss them? Well, they weren't looking for that. No one thought that this was what it was going to be. So they saw the shoe. They knew that either they got hurt or something was terribly wrong. And police trudge in the mud and find the boys. All 3 boys and 2 bikes were also in the mud. There was also various things. We'll talk about that in a second. If you saw the first 10 minutes of Paradise Lost, you've seen crime scene photos. If you look at this case online and you search pictures, you've seen the crime scene photos, and they're horrific and terrible. But for me, the crime scene photos told me a very different story than what I was picturing. And we're going to get into all of that here in a second. But just beware, protect yourself. If you can't handle those things, especially if children, just don't go any more forward with the case or with even this video. Save yourself. Trust me. But for me, I think it's so important to see those, because what happened to these kids were horrific. So all 3 of them were beat in some capacity. To the face, to the body, they were. They were all unclothed, had different injuries, and then their causes for 2 of them were being in the water, being found in the water. The cause for the other one is kind of undetermined, but he was in the water as well. He just didn't have water in his lungs. And the differences of them is very interesting. This isn't someone who went and did the same thing to every boy. But they suffered severe injuries. They were all tied with their own shoelaces, and it was in a hog-tied position. And Christopher Byers was the one that had the most horrific things. And there was, I'm trying to figure out how to say what it is because it's important, but there was cuts to the down area of this little boy. And remember, these are 8-year-old kids. Like, who even thinks of this? But that's the horrific part of this scene. So immediately the cops are like, whoa. I think they looked at the scene and they thought, who could ever think of these things, do these things? Like, it was that bad. And when you start researching this case, you think the same thing, like, whoever would be your suspects here? Like, this is something next level. So the cops are kind of like looking at each other like, we don't know where to go from here. And this small little Midwest town had no idea how to handle just the wave that was about to hit them. They didn't know how to process any of the evidence. They didn't know how to go down a suspect list. We're in the 90s, so there wasn't DNA like there is now. It was just an absolute S show, to be quite honest. but they did what they could, and they tried to process evidence. Like I said, when they found these boys, they pulled them out and was like, put them on the bank, and it was like, they lost evidence, yes. But like, what are you going to do? Like, you find 38-year-old boys and you're like, get them out of the water, and you know they're beyond help, but like, what do? You know, you don't see things like this. So it was definitely difficult for them to process evidence. They didn't take a lot of evidence to the scene. They didn't process a lot of the things that they needed to, or preserve the things that they needed to. They just didn't. That's just the thing of it all. And they lost evidence, like you see in the trial. Like, the defense is like, where is this evidence? And the cops are like, we lost it. Like, what are you gonna do? It's so like I said, this case is so different in a lot of ways. Is like, that's one of them. Is not only was there a coerced confession, but you also just lose the evidence. Like, so this is the part that I didn't make the connection. I don't think a lot of people make the connection, but they looked at the scene and they thought this had to have been the work of someone who was not normal in their mind. And like I said, this was a very religious town. This had to be someone who was in a different religion, right? This had to be someone who worshiped. Yeah. So they immediately went to these three boys. How they got there, I don't think we'll ever know. I think they went down the line of their town, and the people that they thought were weird, they were like, let's look at them. I don't know. But they ended up settling on three teenage boys. These teenage boys were just that. They were different. They didn't come from rich families. They didn't come from super smart families. They were just normal teenagers. And I've thought a lot about this, like how they got to these three boys, but I dress differently, maybe. I love horror movies. I love true crime. I'm different. So I'm like, a lot of times I've thought, would I have gone down for a case like this because I am different? And I think that's scary to think about, but it's also like a reality. And that still happens. They still target people based on the way that they look, based on race, on, you know, your gender. They target people based on things that aren't evidence. It's wild. But it's the reality of it. And especially in the 1990s, because you have people fearing what they don't understand. So the West Memphis law enforcement thought, okay, these three teenagers are doing these rituals in the woods, and they sacrificed these three boys. That's the working theory. Like I said, I don't know how they got there, but they did. So they went down the line, and the number one suspect was Damien Eccles. Damien was just a normal teenage boy. He dressed in black. He listened to Metallica. He read Stephen King. He liked dark poetry and dark writings and drawings. And he'd had his battles with mental health issues. And I don't know why the police looked at him and thought, that boy unalived three little 8-year-olds, but they did. And it was like once they got on that, it was, we're going to prove that that happened, not prove who did it, if that makes any sense. I think with a lot of cases, and we still see this, I think this happened with the Idaho case. I think this happens in a lot of cases. They go in and they say, what's the most obvious conclusion to them? And I think to them, they were, when they see these three little boys, they're like, someone crazy. So that's the most obvious. And then they just find a person, and instead of the evidence speaking for the case, which is what should happen, you railroad someone, you stick to that, and there's no other possibilities. And it's very sad, but that's just how this case panned out, unfortunately. And I think they knew if they went for Damien right away that he would say, I didn't do it. So they kind of got smart about it, and they were like, we can't go straight to Damien Echols. And we know that this case, somebody didn't do it themselves, which is something I want to talk about, because from right away, they said, it's Damien Echols, but he didn't do it himself, because there's no way this case happened from just one perpetrator. And I went back and I looked at the case because I have a person in mind, but what led me there was the evidence, and I'm going to get to that. But I thought, could this person have done this by themselves? And I think it's possible. Do I think it would be easy? Absolutely not. But I do think it's possible. The evidence says that a lot of the injuries that happened to the boys happened together. So, like, one boy was being injured while another boy was being injured. I don't think it was like simultaneously. I think it was close together. And I don't think there's facts initially right now that can tell us that it happened simultaneously by two different people. And they look at a couple facts to say that there was more than one person. They look at the different knots being tied into the shoelaces. So all three boys were tied up. And at least two different methods of tying was in that. And here's what I want you to keep in mind. First of all, the boys were Boy Scouts. So they probably had at least a little experience tying knots. But also, I don't think that the perpetrator necessarily tied them all up. I believe that the perpetrator made the two of the boys tie each other up, and then they did the third one. And I think that is where we see different knots. I believe that either one of the boys tied two of them up, or they helped tie each other up, and the perpetrator did the third one, and that's why there's two different methods. But I'm not certain. Like, I think there's plenty of evidence to say that there could be two perpetrators. But I do think that we need to look at it in a full way and not just one track mind, which is what they did a lot. So that's one of the reasons. I'm trying to think of the other reasons they thought that there was two people. I think just knowing that there was three little boys, one of them could have ran. But I think intimidation and fear played a big part into that. And that's just what I believe. So they had Damien Echols in their mind. They're like, he did it. Now who else? And I think they went to his best friends. And that was Jesse Miss Kelly. And sorry, I need to look up him last. Jason something. Jason. Sorry. Jason Baldwin. Sorry. I knew it was Jason, but they went to his two best friends. Jason Baldwin is another guy that just was different. He was kind of Damien Echols' right-hand man in a lot of ways. When you look at the documentary and you look at the court footage, these two look so vastly different in ages that I was like, why was Damien hanging out with Jason Baldwin? Like, I questioned that for a minute because they look so different. Jason Baldwin is very like baby face. If you see him in the court, like he looks like a young child, and Damien looks more like a man. And these two teenagers, all three of the teenagers were like 17, 18, around that age. And maybe they just look different. But it is a weird, it's shocking when you see it in the court filings. But anyway, so Jason was kind of his right-hand man, but like there was no reason Jason would do this either. It was just kind of, okay, well, they hang out together. They were together that day. He must have done it. And then they found Jesse Miss Kelly. And Jesse Miss Kelly was just another friend. And all of these boys were like kind of along the same lines. They all were black and, you know, listened to heavy metal. And it was like, okay, these three boys are doing sacrifices in the woods. Like, how did we get there? I don't know. But like, that's where the cops went. So you have Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miss Kelly. And this is where things take the craziest turn. So they bring in Jesse Miss Kelly, and the way that they paint Jesse Miss Kelly in a lot of the research and in the movie is that Jesse's stupid. And he's not. Like, this kid was, first of all, 17. He, you know, did have a lower IQ, but like, he also wasn't dumb. He was scared. And when you have someone who is a kid who is scared, who is also not have the highest IQ, you're going to get them to say whatever they want. And I think they knew they couldn't do that with Damien Echols. They probably couldn't do it with Jason Baldwin, but they knew they could do it with Jesse Miss Kelly. So they brought Jesse Miss Kelly in, and a lot of people will argue that, like, okay, Jesse confessed, and that just means that they did it. But when you go back and you hear what he said, first of all, it makes no sense. The cops are asking Jesse questions. Did you see the boys that day? Yes. Okay, what time? First, Jesse Miss Kelly says it was around noon. He says, we saw them around noon, which is physically impossible because they were all in school. So there's no way that Jesse Miss Kelly saw these kids at noon. And that was the first thing. Then he gets what they're wearing completely messed up. He just says something. He, you know, makes up this story. And what I think a lot of people don't know is that Jesse Miss Kelly was interviewed for 12 hours. This was a long interrogation. And the police, when they interrogate you, they're trying to get information out of you. So they are trying to break you. And out of that 12 hours, 45 minutes of it was recorded. And that's what they used in court. 45 minutes. So what do you think the other 12 hours were? And I don't think that police sat down and said, okay, this and this and this and this and this happened, Jesse. You're going to say this. I think it was more like what we saw with How to Make a Unaliver. I think they led him to the questions. An example would be like if you came in and you said, Sarah, you have a pink shirt on today. And I said, no, I don't have a pink shirt on. But then they said, well, you have a pink and white shirt on. It's tie-dye. It's pink and white, right? It's not long sleeved. It's short sleeved. And it's pink and white. And they do that for 12 hours. And at the end of the 12 hours, you're like, okay, fine, I have a pink shirt on. And I think that's what happened with Jesse. I think they wore him down. They just fed him details, told him things, and it's textbook coercion. It's very sad to see Jesse crack the way he does because he's terrified. And I think the police knew that, and I think they played on it. So I have written down here the facts that Jesse got wrong, and these were basic facts. So he claimed it happened at noon. The boys were in school. He said that they tied him with rope. He said all of them were tied with rope, but they were tied with shoelaces. And then he misidentified which boy suffered which injury. Now, when you look at these things, you could say, okay, the details were close enough. Okay, maybe it was 4, and maybe Jesse hadn't gotten up until noon. So he thought it was closer to noon. And maybe he thought that they were being tied up with rope, but it was really shoelaces. And maybe he just didn't know the kids that well. And so that's why he got that wrong. But I think when you look at his confession and you see the evidence, like there's huge holes in the facts. This just wasn't a factual confession at all. And I think people now know that. I think they've admitted that. And it's just really sad. So eventually, Jesse broke. He said, yep, me, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, we were all in the woods. We saw them. We unalived them. And I think one of the saddest parts for me in watching the court videos was Jesse is on tape saying how these 3 boys were brutally, horrifically unalived. And the parents are sitting there having to visualize their 8-year-old child being unalived this way. And it wasn't even true. Like, putting them through that just is torture, in my opinion. And I can't imagine being those parents. So, went through the trial. I urge you to go through the trial and just watch some of it or watch the movie because the trial was so... It was just painted one way. It was painted that these boys did it and that was it. And, you know, in the movie, there's a lot of the parents just hating and like wishing bad upon these 3 teenagers. And I don't blame them. Like, that's not their fault at all. But when you look back at it, you just cringe because it's not even the right person. And it's just so heartbreaking because their anger is on these 3 teenagers and they weren't even the ones that did it. It's just horrific. So 3 of these boys were found guilty. There was no forensic evidence, no witnesses, no motive. That to me just in itself is insane. There's no physical evidence pointing these teenagers to doing it. So you have these experts coming up at trial and they're saying, well, black clothes, heavy metal music, that's why they did it. You have this whole story painted, and it's horrible. But so Jason was given life without parole. Damien Eccles was sentenced to the D penalty. And then Miss Kelly was also given life as well. It was horrifying because these were teenage boys that are now taken away too. And I think the town, I think the world at this point was like, okay, we did what we needed to do. They're put away. It's all good. But it was far, far from over. So then we go into this part of like, okay, boys are put away. They're in prison. The town can now rebuild. And in 1996, HBO releases Paradise Lost. This is the documentary I was talking about. It goes through the crime. It goes through the court cases. And I just watched it recently, to be quite honest. I hadn't watched it back in the day. And what really got me about it was people were like, oh, you have to watch Paradise Lost because it really tells you that these boys are innocent. And I'm watching and I'm waiting and like, yes, it does because there's no evidence. But like, it really wasn't a swaying documentary to me. I know a lot of documentaries that are very one-sided. And this one, to me, wasn't as much, if that makes sense. Like, it told the truth, which the truth was there was no evidence. So I guess kind of in a way it was swayed. But yeah, so it really went over the flaws in the investigation. That was the big one. Like, it really talked about them losing evidence, them not processing things right, all of that. It went through the police tunnel vision on the teenagers, the course confession. It definitely goes through it. And it gives a couple alternate suspects, but it's not like crazy on it. It talks about the suspects that were brought up in court, which were the big ones. So that's what we got, right? And this was released, and it was like everybody was in line at Blockbuster to get Paradise Lost. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was wanting to watch it. Everybody had an opinion. And it became these boys were falsely imprisoned. And the fight for justice for them. And I think when Paradise Lost came out, that's when the shift happened to where this case was no longer about 3 innocent boys. It was about the injustice of the teenagers, which I agree with. It's all bad. It's all bad. But there was also 3 young boys who lost their life. And I think that gets overshadowed a lot. So the film brought out a lot of celebrities. Johnny Depp, Eddie Vedder. People became advocates for these boys and wanting to get justice. And money started coming in for forensic experts and defense attorneys. And, you know, okay, we've got some money behind the case now. Like, let's try to solve this. And I think when this is is my opinion, but when celebrities get behind true crime, I think a lot of the times they want to be involved and they don't have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea what they're talking about. But yeah. So we get to the 2000s, right? And mind you, these boys are still sitting in prison. If the D penalty would have been executed earlier, Damien Echols would have lost his life. Just putting that out there. These boys were still sitting in prison in 2000 when new DNA technology was being invented, it was being used, it was starting to make sense for cases, and it blew up. And it started solving cases. So DNA technology comes on the scene, and we get to revisit some evidence. And when we talk about evidence in this trial, people often get a lot of this confused. They're like, oh, there was evidence in the case. There was so much evidence. There was pieces of evidence, yes, but it's very strange because there's this debate, and this happened in trial, between whether or not the boys were unalived somewhere else and put in the woods, or they were unalived in the woods. And I believe that they were unalived in the woods because I think there was enough evidence to say that. But people say they were unalived somewhere else because these boys were clean. Like, and that's so weird to say, but like, they were injured a lot, and they had a lot of injuries. They had, red, but there was none of it at the scene. They didn't have any red evidence at the scene, even though these kids definitely had red injuries, if that makes any sense. How is that possible? And that's where people make the leap of like, okay, this happened somewhere else. But I think they were in that water overnight. And I think it washed away a lot of stuff. And that's why we don't have necessarily red evidence. We don't have fingerprints. Like, they couldn't find those pieces of physical evidence anywhere. But what we do have is we have none of the evidence in any part of any DNA belong to Damien, Jesse, or Jason. None. We have a hair consistent with Terry Hobbs, which is one of the stepfathers. And that was on the shoelaces that were tied on the boys. And this hair was tied into a knot on the shoelaces. And that to me is very interesting. We have another hair consistent with a friend of Hobbs, and it was found on a tree stump nearby. But we have no idea how that got there, when it got there, anything. We have no trace of those teenagers anywhere. Okay? So they brought this evidence. They said, look, we have hair evidence, DNA evidence. We're bringing it to you, and we're saying we want a retrial. And Arkansas said no. They just straight up said no. And I mean, it's legal for them to do so, but they said no. And they said, what we'll do is we're going to let you take the Alford plea. We're not going to retry you. We're not going to say you didn't do it. We are going to let you take the Alford plea, which is the biggest cop-out of the century, to be quite honest, because you have evidence right there saying that these people didn't do it, but you refuse to say that they didn't do it. It makes no sense. So they offered the Alford plea. This means, in case you don't know, that they plead guilty, but it's basically saying, like, we know you have enough evidence against us, but we won't say we did it. And that's what the Alford plea is. But you're basically still pleading guilty, admitting that you did it. And this happened in 2011 when they were offered the Alford plea. And they bring it to the boys and they're like, look, we're not going to let you be retried. And I think for Damien, I think for Jason, and I think for Jesse, I think it was like, okay, like, why not? And they took the Alford plea. And to the law, that's an admission of guilt, even though the Alford plea isn't an admission of guilt. It still looks like you did it. And I think that was really hard for them to do, but I think it was really their only option, and I think they backed them into a corner with it. So they took the Alford plea, and they were let out. They said, okay, you serve time, you can walk away as free men. And I think the public looked at it as this huge win, which it was. It was a way of saying, like, okay, you're getting out of jail for a crime you didn't commit, and that's awesome. But I think to those three men, and I think to the people who knew the law, it didn't change anything, because those three men are still basically saying you did it. They're basically, I don't know how to say it without saying it. But they still have the same mark on them as if they did it. They're still presented as unalivers, is what I'm saying. It's hard to watch my words, to be completely honest. But okay, so they walk out, free men. They're like, okay, this is a win. It's huge. Damien Echols started writing books, and he advocates for criminal justice reform. Jason works with the innocence organizations, and Jesse Miss Kelly kind of lives a quiet, private life. They've been in the news. They say they want DNA tested because they want to know who did this, but they just kind of like, they cleared their names and they're free, you know? And Damien Echols has had a huge push for this year for new testing to come about. And I think he was a lot of the reason that we got the testing. So this last year, 2024, I think, it was either 24 or 25, they said, we're testing all new evidence. It's going to be a whole new look at the case. And they sent off items to be tested. They sent off the shoelaces. They've sent off the hair DNA. They've sent off clothing. They've sent off a ton of stuff with this case to be retested. And this case, I believe, will likely be solved within the next year. I think 2026 is when we're going to see West Memphis 3 solved. And I think we're going to know who actually did it. I don't know what's going to happen with the law, because I don't know if that case can be retried again and if that person will come to justice. But that's going to have to be something we come to. But it's a huge thing for us to be able to look at this case again with tested DNA and say, we know who did it, you know? So that's kind of where the case stands right now. The case of Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers is officially unsolved right now. We don't know who did it. We don't have justice for these boys. And it's just really sad. So before we complete this live, I do want to go over suspects because I wanted to do a whole thing on this because I have a suspect that I believe in. But let's talk about suspects for a second. I think one of the most frustrating things about this case is when you look at the top suspects, two of them are these boys' own stepfathers. How can you be around such awful people? Like, it makes me crazy. It really does. But here we are. So the first suspect that we have on our list is Mark Byers. Now, Mark Byers is Christopher Byers' stepfather. I think one of the big pushes for Mark Byers being a suspect is because first of all, Christopher Byers' injuries were the worst, and I think that's what pushes a lot of people in that direction. His behavior, like, this is the weirdest guy I've ever seen. He's really religious, sings in the choir at church, but like super weird, very weird guy. And he's very suspicious, and I don't think he did it, but he's super suspicious. He gave inconsistent statements. And then the biggest thing was that during the filming for Paradise Lost, he gave the producers this kitchen utensil. This kitchen utensil was Christopher's. Christopher had this on him at all times. It was a pocket one. And it was Christopher's favorite. He used it like in the woods to cut on trees and do all the things that boys do. And he gave this to the producers. The producers were like, first of all, how did you get this? Because supposedly it was on Christopher the day he went missing. And they were like, that's weird. Even weirder is they believed that there was red on that kitchen utensil. So they took the kitchen utensil, handed it over to police. Police tested it. It was positive for red. I don't know if they know who's red at this particular time because this was back in the 90s when this happened. But people were like, okay, that's super weird. Like, it's him. And here's the thing. I think he could be someone who was an accomplice, but I don't think Mark Byers did this all by himself because Mark Byers is a weirdo, and I don't think he had all the capacity to do this and get away with it like he did. So that's why I don't believe in him. We have Terry Hobbs. I'm going to come back to him, and I'm going to come back to that hair question that you have. The friend of Hobbs, how does his hair show up? I want to talk about that in just a second. I'm going to come back to all of this. We're going to talk about right now is Mr. Bojangles. So this in court was insane. So the day of everything happening, the boys went missing and all of that, there is a restaurant that's kind of across the field from the woods. This man, black man, comes into the restaurant and he is covered in red and mud and water. He goes into the woman's bathroom. He leaves red and mud and also poo on the walls, covering everything. And then he leaves and he is never seen again. And this guy is referred to as Mr. Bojangles. The manager at Bojangles is like, okay, that was weird, right? He calls cops and he says, this is strange. And this is the night of everything. So they don't really know where the boys are. They think they're just still missing at this point. So the police officer said, okay, it's really weird. I'll take a statement tomorrow. The next day, after they find the boys, know the boys are missing, know what happened to them, an officer gets dispatched to the Bojangles. They go through the drive-through. They don't even go inside. They go through the drive-through. They take the statement of the manager, collect no evidence, take a statement, and they leave. Couple months or years down the line, they're like, that's really weird. That matches up to this crime. What should we do? They go back to the Bojangles and they take swabs of behind the toilet where all this was. They have the swabs. They are holding on to them because they have the people in prison who did it. So they don't really need the swabs, right? In court, you see the defense ask the cop, okay, well, where are those swabs now? And he straight up looks at her and says, they're lost. I lost them. They're gone. So we don't even have the swabs that could connect Mr. Bojangles to the crime. We don't know whose red was on him. We don't know if the mud connected to the mud that was there. We know nothing. And so Mr. Bojangles is kind of a mystery, to be honest. But a lot of people think that he's the best suspect for this case. And I think he's a very valid suspect. Like, it's weird. It's very weird. To me, I always look at that car wash being there, the highway being there. He could have been from somewhere else, and he just happened to clean up or do whatever he did in this bathroom. I'm sure that people get that at other rest stops at other places. But it's weird, and people wonder if he's a witness. Like, and that's the thing, we'll never know, because the cops that should have been taking the evidence and the statements of Mr. Bojangles never did. So we don't know where Mr. Bojangles is. He could be passed now. Like, he could have been a witness, and he's gone. So just another frustrating part of this case. But he does come up as a suspect quite often. We have kind of like locals, you know, there's not a lot of weight into any other suspects. There's a possibility it could be a completely random person. And people bring that up a lot. That was this just a random criminal who was parked at the car wash, saw those kids go into the woods, and did what they did. Okay. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. I do want to talk about Terry Hobbs. I looked at all the evidence, and in my mind, I think Terry Hobbs is the strongest. And I went back and I watched, like I said, I watched the movie, and Terry Hobbs isn't shown as much in the movie. Definitely Byers is shown way more, but I think it's just because he's weird. But Terry Hobbs isn't shown a ton. He has the biggest link for me, DNA and like physical evidence wise, because of that hair. So he had a hair twisted into one of the knots on one of the boys. And I believe it was Michael Moore. I don't believe it was his own stepson. I believe it was Michael Moore. And that's what gets me, because transfer hairs happen all the time. You see me sitting here doing this, okay? I could go and I could touch something because I've been going through my hair like this, and a hair could be on this cup, and then it gets transferred to somewhere else. Like, hair transfers happen quite often. And DNA transfer happens like that sometimes. But then you see that, like, this was the only valid DNA, only hair found. It was twisted into one of the knots. That to me is so strange. You asked about hi, it looks like I missed most of this. Glad it popped up on my feed. Hi. You can always go back and watch it. Please do, because it tells a lot about this case. I went into absolute lot. But thank you for coming by. So you commented, the friend of Hobbs, how does his hair show up? So a friend of Terry Hobbs that he was with that day was found in the woods, and it was on a tree stump. It came back to being this friend, and people were like, okay, Terry Hobbs and this friend did it, which I absolutely think is valid, because they were together that day. His hair showed up at the crime scene. Absolutely valid. I do think that it's not 100%. And let me tell you why this hair, the friend's hair, is different from Terry Hobbs' hair, in my opinion. Terry Hobbs' hair was woven into a knot. And Terry Hobbs' friend's hair was just on a stump. And I feel like the transfer there could have happened more easily than Terry Hobbs's hair. If that makes any sense. Let me take a drink real fast. That is why it's different for me in my world of evidence. I've been following this case since the HBO series. I can imagine how much work you put into it. Yes, I definitely have. I explained all of that earlier on in the video about how my TT account has been shut down unexpectedly. Don't know why. But that's why I came here and did this full episode, because now everyone I can reference back to here to get the full story, because I was doing multiple parts and that came crashing down. So let's go back to the suspect of Terry Hobbs. So you have that hair. You have multiple witnesses claiming he was with the boys that evening. This is what I believe happened with Terry that evening. So you have witnesses, and like I said, witness testimonies are across the board. Usually you don't put any weight in them, because they're a lot of times wrong, right? But witnesses saw Terry Hobbs yelling at the three boys. There has been a lot of talk, and the reason I put my weight into these statements is because they came from Terry Hobbs' ex-wife, who is the mother of, not Christopher, not Michael. Hold on. I want to get this right. Stevie. Sorry. Okay. So Stevie's stepdad is Terry Hobbs. Terry Hobbs' ex-wife, who is Stevie Branch's mother, and Stevie Branch's sister, both came out and said in statements that he was definitely a violent person, that he would abuse them both physically, emotionally, and S-wise, and that he was probably doing the same, and they believe that he did the same to Stevie. So that, to me, I hold a lot of weight in that, because they're saying, look, he was absolutely terrifying. Terry Hobbs would go from a nice man to just flying off the handle. And he would absolutely abuse his stepson. And I think that day they saw him yelling at the boys. I think that was a normal occurrence. I think he did that every day. And I think this day, I think Stevie or one of the boys mouthed off. They said, "We're not coming home." And they ran off. Because when you look at it, Michael Moore was the only one that wasn't having any abuse done to him. Stevie and Christopher were both abused at home. And I think they wanted to run away. And I think Michael was their friend, and I think he backed them up, and I think he was against this happening, and I think they ran away and they ran into the woods, and I think that Terry Hobbs followed them, and I think he took his anger out on them. And my theory, my biggest working theory, is that he lined the boys up on the bank, and I think he said, "I'm going to humiliate you," because I think he was angry. And I think he went over to them and pulled their pants down and made them unclothe. And I think that is why the buttons on the pants are still buttoned, but they're inside out, because that's how they found the pants. And so that physical evidence links for me that Terry Hobbs aggressively pulled those pants down. And I think he lined them up, made them unclothe, ridiculed them, beat them, and then I think he went too far. And I think when he did that, something happened and he had to hide it. And he panicked. And I think he pushed them underwater into the mud. And I think that's where they stayed, and that's how the physical evidence happened. And I think Terry Hobbs' hair got tied into that ligature because he was the one tying it. I think a couple of the boys tied each other up, and Terry Hobbs was the last one to tie the knot. And I think that's where the hair got caught. I don't know if he did it with someone else. I can't prove it either way. I can't prove that it was Terry, but with the DNA that we have, I can't prove that it was someone else. That hair that was the friend, I feel like it could have came from something else. It was a transfer hair. But I think Terry Hobbs' hair being in the ligature means a lot. And I think that, with his conflicting statements, his violent behavior, I think all of it boils down to Terry Hobbs did this. And I think when we start getting the DNA tests back, when we get another look at the case that isn't so tunnel vision into the teenagers, I think they're going to put those pieces together. Why do you think he was involved with the other boys instead of just waiting for Stevie to get home? You have a great theory. I think, like I said, I think they ran away from him. And I think they either were planning to run away fully, or he just got so angry. And I think his violent nature wasn't going to stop at one of them, at Stevie, I think. And when you look at the evidence to their injuries, Stevie had a big wound on his face. And I think if you see these three boys, and you think about them being in the woods and someone's coming and they're hurting your best friend, you're going to defend them. And I think that's why Michael Moore had anything done to him. is because he was defending. I think he stood up against it. I think Christopher Byers had the stuff to down there. I can't fully explain it all. I go back and forth. In court, they presented two theories. They presented that someone cut down there. And then the other theory was that an animal in the water had bit him there. I think it's a good point to bring up that maybe an animal did do that. But I think it's possible that he did it because there was just rage. There was just so much rage in him. I think he went too far. I think because he was SAing his Stevie, I think maybe he SA'd Christopher in the process. Back and forth, I can't convince myself of all of them. Yeah, I lay at night sometimes when I think about these boys and I think about like getting justice for them. I said this in a video that I posted on the other one. I feel like they got lost so much in this. I feel so bad for Damien Eccles and the other two, Miss Kelly and Baldwin. I feel so bad for them, for what they've had to go through, what they're going through, all of it. But I think my heart just aches for these boys because their whole case wasn't about them. And now they may never get justice because it was never about them. It was about getting these three teenagers that didn't do anything, putting them away. And it wasn't about the victims in this. And I feel like I said, I never wanted to do this case. And I feel like it came to me and it said, you have to do this because these three boys are important. And that's why I always kept coming back. And I think that's why I did such a long, deep dive into this, is because it's just so important. And they need a voice in all of this. They really do. Their lives were already sad to begin with. Exactly. Like, you think about, like, I said this, I think, on this maybe, but you think about, like, two of the suspects were their own stepdads. And they were suffering at home in their little 8-year-old lives. And now it's like they may never get justice for the brutal, brutal ending. It's insane to me. So I've talked for an hour and a half. Go back, please watch the full thing. I'm very proud of this live. I feel like I got mostly everything out. I might post a few videos just because, like, I can't stop thinking about it. But thank you, everyone, for supporting me through this. Hang in with me when it comes to my content on here, because I had all of my work from the last really like 3-4 years ripped away from me, and I have no idea why. And I'm still trying to figure out how to overcome that. So just be patient as much as you can. I really want to do lives like this. I feel like this is the best way to not only get out what I'm thinking, but engage you guys to be able to be part of the conversation as well. If you like this, like, please let me know somewhere so I can continue. But you guys are the backbone of everything. I started on YouTube. I'm so excited to be back, and I'm just excited. I love you guys. Please take care of yourselves. Go do something fun after this because this was heavy. And I'll be back sometime. I don't know when. Thank you for listening to the West Memphis 3. Please comment below the names of the victims. Below Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore. So we can make this about them. And if you wish to put in Damian Eccles, Jesse Miss Kelly, and Jason Baldwin, that's fine too, because they're victims as well. But thank you all, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.